That's what I'm talking about. Hook it up.
That was my first night in the hospital, and my first time with experiencing morphine, which I thought would have been my savior and a short hospital stay. But I was definitely wrong about that. And this is my story. What is going on, Next Level Nation? This is your man Johnny F here with Next Level Warrior, the channel where we help you to level up your life. If you're new here and interested in becoming your next level self, then you know what to do. Hit that red subscribe button and make sure to turn on post notifications to catch my videos posted every week. Hope you guys are doing great. Though the chances are that if you came across this video through search, you're probably worried that you might have an appendix issue going on. And rightfully so, it's really not something to be taken lightly, regardless of how invincible you might think or feel you are. This was part of my downfall, which in part is what led to the actual rupture of my appendix, and a much longer recovery time physically and psychologically from the experience. Regardless though, there is a silver lining to be found in every experience we have in life, regardless of how terrible it is and how long it might take us to find it. So, that being said, let's take a little trip back in time to share the story. Oh, and you may very well get valuable information out of this video that could help you or someone you care about, whether you have appendicitis or not. So make sure to watch this till the end. It was the beginning of April, and I had just finished my first bulk in years that lasted about 6 months. I was feeling stronger than ever and also gained more chub than I would have liked. I spent a few days out of town on a solo trip with no cell phone, no computer, fully unplugged. Just me, the peaceful springtime nature to enjoy as I took a break away from the city. Coming back home with tons of inspiring content plans for body transformation videos, as I had also started a 3-month cut to get back into six-pack shape, I was hit with sharp stomach pains in the middle of the night. It didn't seem very bad, just enough to wake me up. Though I was able to get back to sleep, I didn't think much of it, but definitely noted that something wasn't right. That was April 9th. I felt totally fine during the daytime, but had the same experience 2 other nights in a row, and I never get stomach pains. Now day 3 though is when it hit me. Something was seriously wrong. I couldn't stand straight. I was having constant abdominal pain with recurring awful contractions that took the pain meter way up. I called a walk-in clinic since they were all closed with the pandemic, and I experienced the amazing convenience of having a doctor call me back within 20 minutes to discuss what was happening. Now listen closely. I did not have the majority of symptoms people can experience. There was no vomiting, fever, nausea, nor issues with going to the washroom. I simply had extreme abdominal pain with contractions. The doctor suggested the possibility of being a few things that weren't appendicitis related. He prescribed some intestinal muscle relaxers, set up a case file with me, and said I should definitely get blood work and an ultrasound done immediately. This was the day that I actually said to myself, I can't work out today. My body cannot do this. Why is this a big deal? Well, it's the first lifting session that I missed in over 6 years. But back to the topic at hand. Since the intestinal muscle relaxers did absolutely nothing, I had rediscovered Tylenol and ibuprofen, or Advil. These were absolute saviors. Now I say rediscovered because I basically avoided any and all pharmaceuticals for close to 15 years of my life, starting around the time I entered into a long and fun hippie phase of my life. But I digress. I found out the blood work and ultrasound couldn't be done for another 4 days, and while the pain meds made the pain more bearable during this waiting game, my worry increasingly grew as the pain was now spreading down to my body and intensifying. On the evening of April 14th, I woke up in tears, hobbling around and contemplating calling the ambulance, but then shifting into this state of feeling shame and doubt as if I needed to be bleeding to death or shot to call the ambulance for myself. I took some pain medication to get back to bed, and the next day around 10 a.m., I was like,
Yup, I definitely need to get to the hospital.
Being in the middle of the pandemic in the northern part of Toronto where I live, The emergency room was super empty, and literally within 15 minutes I was IV'd, being loaded up with morphine. That was fantastic, being the best I had felt in days. Temporarily disconnected from the pain and having the comfort of knowing that I was probably going to be okay. They took me in to do an ultrasound and CT scan. Then I was off to my isolation room. At this point, I actually did have a fever, so they treated me as if I was a COVID possibility until the results came in from shoving that swab so far up my nose, it felt like they were poking my brain. That first evening, I broke my 3-day fast, which I did in order to skyrocket my white blood cells to hopefully help the situation out. Breaking a multi-day fast with a large blast of sugar is something I would never suggest. But it was late and I was all doped up. In fact, that probably was the best I felt throughout the entire next 10 days. I realized during my first night there that the IV drip morphine was nearly useless, as I would feel it super quick hitting me, drift off to sleep, and then immediately wake up an hour later with huge pain rushes coming back in while I was urging the nurses to give me more. Yet, I couldn't get more because I had to wait 2 hours in between doses. Needless to say, it was one of the many sleepless nights. The pain felt like, and this is going to be a little bit graphic, it felt like Edward Scissorhands with only one side of the scissors, like knives slowly as ever, slicing directly into my guts. Not through the skin, but already through the abdominal muscles underneath, moving bit by bit while my body slowly reacted by contracting up towards the knives cutting in. And at the same time, it felt like my were being constantly squeezed. Yeah, not fun. So pardon me for the details, but I did warn you. The next day I heard the not so good news that my appendix had ruptured. Though it doesn't happen like an explosion, as you might think, it's more of a tear that occurs and then that lovely infectious fluid slowly oozes out. From what they saw in my CT scans, it was far too risky to go in and take it out. Everything was super inflamed. I recall one of the doctors saying, unless I misheard him,
We would possibly have to remove the bottom end of your colon.
I looked at him with terribly wide eyes and realized that I had to play the waiting game. Being pumped full of antibiotics and not enough painkillers until the point that my body does its magic trick of blocking off the infectious pus into what's called an abscess that then they could drain. I asked them, so how long could this take? Okay, more like, how long could this take?
Hopefully a couple days.
At that point, I should have felt pretty grateful, but just the thought of having to experience what I was going through for more than 24 hours was way more than I wanted to digest.
And I actually appreciate that they were so optimistic and avoided telling me that it could be over a week. That would have been too hard to process at the time. And the fact of this being right in the middle of the pandemic added the extra restrictions of no visitors to spend time with, let alone bringing me a few things that I really could have used. I really sound like a negative Nancy, don't I? This is not my typical self. Believe me. By day 3, I was actually able to get up on my feet, though I definitely needed my ass verbally kicked by one of the awesome nurses reminding me that I cannot just lay in bed the whole time, as it'll cause way more issues for me. Needless to say, I cried like a little baby with hopelessness, but within the hour, and after the next gram of Tylenol, I was actually up and moving, making my way down the hall in what felt like a dream, pushing my IV stand. This definitely built up my confidence enough to actually get some fancy footwork in. Pretty good for not having much use of my right hip flexor. Now, as much as it sucked through the next few days, I thought I would make use of the empty board by my bed to help visualize getting out of there quicker. It definitely lifted my spirits. So after days of antibiotics, I was getting more and more concerned that the pain wasn't dropping at all. I couldn't swallow more than a tablespoon of water without getting nauseous, and I kept dreaming of eating solid food and actually sleeping on my side for once. I passed the time by walking to different places, sitting in different places, journaling, listening to audiobooks, and, of course, a whole bunch of YouTube. On day 9, though, I finally heard the good news. The results from the second CT scan showed a drainable abscess, So they brought me to the coolest looking operating room, asked Alexa to play my requested jazz tunes, and did their thing, stuffing 10 centimeters of rubber tubing right through here. I could definitely feel what they were doing, and made sure to let them know about it, at which point they realized they didn't give me enough fentanyl and immediately blasted me with another dose. It hit me instantly, but the weird thing is that I could still feel it all. I just didn't care. And then I continued not caring when I made it back to my bed to snap this sweet selfie. Once the drugs subsided though, I was met with the new feeling of having a hole through my stomach draining out to a bag attached to my leg that made it that much more challenging to move without screaming. Though the great news was that within 12 hours, the abdominal pain that had plagued me for days on end was now going away, as the infectious fluid moved out of me, and they told me I'd be able to go home pretty soon. I had actually really grown fond of wearing my hospital gown, partly because I couldn't physically put on most clothing, let alone handle the pain of anything squeezing my waist. So before I got dressed, I took the opportunity to snap a few selfies. Now, aside from the excellent support that I got from the nurses and the medical team, I would definitely never wish that type of pain nor experience upon anyone, especially the huge psychological challenges that I had during my home recovery for the next many weeks. I had lost most of the muscle mass I worked so hard to gain in such a short time frame, and I was extremely physically limited from so much that I couldn't actually do for myself while I had the drain tube in. Needless to say, what we thought was a week of having the tube in turned into a rarer case of needing to keep it in for 6 weeks. I can't tell you how great I am for being tube-free, for being able to roll around in bed so freely, being able to walk with strength and finally stretch again. June 1st was the day that it came out and everything completely turned around. But there's one thing I have not touched on here. How did this all happen? How did my appendix get so infected? Well, it was basically because of this little thing. That tiny white dot is called a fecalith. Basically a hardened, calcified little piece of shit that made its way perfectly onto the opening of my appendix, blocking it from being able to do its thing. So how do people get fecaliths? I have no idea. The doctors weren't able to tell me, and I was hard pressed to find any info on how they're actually formed during some Google searches. Do you know? If so, definitely put it in the comments, because I'm sure many of us would like to know how to prevent them or how to maybe dissolve them. And a few more things for you to be aware of is that 7% of the world's population will have an appendix issue at some point in their lives. And more than 50% of people can actually die if they don't get antibiotics or medical assistance. So definitely inform yourself of what the symptoms are, pay attention to the warning signs, and aside from the other 95% of the content that I produce on this channel to help you physically and mentally become your next self, definitely do not do what I did and wait that long. I could have saved many days off of my hospital stay and weeks off of my recovery time if I had actually made it to the hospital sooner. So, with that said, make sure that you're subscribed with notifications turned on to catch my videos posted every week. I'll see you in the next one.
This is first thing to break a fast with.
Model 11 Jello. You dig?
April 17th, amazing. Let's go.